Hello, I will be explaining the PR. I have three main changes to this PR. Okay, so let's look into one by one. The first one is about the work on the list component. So let's look into the comments that I wrote. So first, this is a component called a daily scrum update list loader, which is a loader component for a list component. And let me show you the list component. This is how the dashboard looks after the works of this PR. And the list component is going to uh, at this area under here where my mouse is covering is the list component area, and it's going to consist daily scrum update cards, which looks like this. For now it just has one, but if there are many, it's going to be shown as masonry UI. So that is how the list component looks like. And the loader component is responsible for fetching data from a Supabase and pass it into the UI client side component. So these are all the data fetching logics and some of the data processing. Okay, let's move on to the next comment explanation. This one, we are still in the same component, and this function is a main data for the list. It fetches entries data from a daily scrum update entries table of a Supabase. Okay, so this function takes two arguments. One is organization hash ID, which is a unique identifier for organization, and a date field, date value to filter out entries by dates, because the list is subject to an organization, so that's why it needs an organization ID, and the list only shows uh, selected dates entries, so it has to filter by date. That's why it has two arguments for this function. And this function is just fetching data from a Supabase. And these are the queries and some cache tags right here. Okay, let's move on. Now we're just back into the loader component for the list. And so, okay, after the data fetching is finished, and the data is called as a daily scrum update entries. So after the data is all loaded, the component is doing some kind of process for data processing to pass it to the UI component. So it runs a map function, it loops through it, it makes into make an object that a UI component requires. Basically, it takes answers and questions of each data and combine them as a pair, and uh, make an array called QA pairs. So, okay, yeah, that's it. I think that's it. Let's move on. Okay, so, uh, but I want to show you something else. After, um, let me a second. Also, after the data is processed, the processed data is passed to the daily scrum update list component as an updates prop. Okay, now let's move on. Right now we are looking at the daily scrum update list component, which is a UI component that a loader component renders. And this list component is responsible for rendering daily scrum updates in many views. But for now, it's just showing as a masonry UI, and for uh, it's the component is rendering a component called masonry, which is the one I just made through this PR. And as the masonry component is purely client side, mainly using a client side features, so that's why this list component has to be a client component too. So it's using a use client directive here. Oh, and this is a card component, but it's just a simple UI work, so I'm not explaining it. Anyways, it's the main point is that the list is rendering a masonry component. Okay, so we're still in the same component, and right here I wrote a function, but I commented out. Uh, it's because the function is not used on the runtime, but this function is to calculate the styles for the masonry, but I cannot use it on the runtime because it calculates out the class names for the masonry, but the the tailwind class name should not be calculated on the runtime because the style, the final style file, the final CSS file is generated on the build time. So this function is just to it is I put it as a reference. So maybe if a style changes, I can use this function again. Mm. The result changes depending on the width of the card. If I want to change the width of the daily scrum update card, I can run the function again and put the result into the masonry class name, and also configuration value for the masonry component. Mm. Okay, let's move on. Lastly, the list component is used in the right here, and this is a dashboard page of an organization. Okay, so that's it for the list, and let's move on to the next item. It's about how a date picker component is consisted. Okay, so this right now we are looking into a component called date picker loader, and I created, and it's also responsible for data fetching and pass it to the UI component. Well, actually, it's not a UI component. I would call it a client side component, a client component. So these are all the data fetching logics. And for this component, the next, yeah, we're still in the same component, and the loader component here only fetches um, not only it fetches lots of data, and finally the main data it needs is a time zone value of an organization. So finally it gets a time zone setting of an organization and pass it to a date picker client component. Now we're looking into a date picker component. So it takes one value, which is a time zone data. Mhm. So the reason why this component needs a time zone is because it's to calculate the today value. Because as the application, the daily Scrum application calculates all the data based on the organization's time zone setting. So the today has to be the today of the time zone. So that's how it calculates today. And here is how the date value is calculated. The date picker component basically reads date value from a URL search parameter. If there is let's look into it. If there is a date search param with a value, the date picker reads this value and renders it on the trigger and on the calendar. So that's how the date state works. Okay, so we're still in the same component, and this function is the handler function for the today button. The today button is this one, and if our user clicks today, the date is changed to the current time zones today. So it creates a new search parameter object and sets a date with a value of today in ISO format and adds the value to the URL. And this function is a date select handler function. When a user clicks date on the calendar, the selected date is applied to the URL search parameter. And after selecting, the calendar is closed. After the selection, the calendar is closed. Mhm. And this function is a disabled function, which is passed to a calendar function. So this disabled is a predicator function, which runs for each date on a calendar. So if when this function returns true, the date is disabled. So I disabled the dates day after tomorrow, all the dates after tomorrow. Uh, okay, so uh, we're looking into calendar components rendering part. We're still in a date picker component, and as the calendar style can be modified with the class names prop. Uh, all the values are basically copied and pasted from original chassis and UI calendar component, and I made some little bit size changes. So it's basically same, but some sizes are different. And finally, this is where the date picker is rendered. It's also rendered on the dashboard page of an organization. Okay, so that's it for this item. And lastly, let's look into how the style changes are applied. So for the first one is that about the sidebar width is modified. I changed the sidebar width because uh, uh, there are not much important information in the sidebar, so but it was taking too much space, so I made it a little bit smaller. Yeah, and let's move on. And next, this is a layout component for the organization, and it used to have max width setting for the layout, but I found out that there might be needs for different max width setting page for a page. So I moved the max width setting from the layout. So if page needs a max width setting, it can be applied to each page. And for the dashboard page, it it has a max width setting, but not it's not applied on the layout. And finally, this is a style change for the user menu drop down, and it used to have a fixed width setting, but now it was changed to the minimum width change. Now it has a minimum width, so if the content gets longer, the menu can be extended accordingly. And the alignment was changed, so the drop down was covered by the end, was hidden by some part of the drop down was hidden by the screen, but now it's not anymore. Okay, so that's it. That's all the work's done in this PR. So yeah, and okay, so thanks for listening. Have a great day.